ahead and we will get started. I just hit the record button, so you should be seeing that to accept the recording. We will be posting this session, as you can see. Oh, actually, we do not have that link, but just so that you know, this session will be posted on our PDE YouTube channel in the upcoming weeks. So I do welcome you to the session this morning, all about customizing course selections using the PVAAS data to ensure that we've got the right course selections, the right fit for every student. So this is the second session that we are offering, but like I said, we are recording and we'll be posting. If you haven't grabbed the link to the PowerPoint yet, go ahead and grab that in the chat. We do encourage you to drop any questions that you might have into the chat box throughout the next 45 minutes, or use that Q&A option that's in the Zoom webinar tool as well. Our email address is there on the screen. I think Laurie has dropped that in the chat as well, pdepvas@iu13.org. Feel free to contact us after the session at any point as well with any questions that you have. So, who are we? I'm Jen Ross. I'm with the PVAAS statewide team for PDE. I've been with the team for a number of years. And as you can see from my background, I am part of the Intermediate Unit 13. We contract with PDE to support all of the implementation and understanding of PVAAS data across the state. I'm joined by Laurie Kolka, my colleague on the PVAAS statewide team. I'll be facilitating a lot of the content while Laurie is dropping those links for resources into the chat and helping to answer questions. We are very privileged actually today, though, to have Dr. Pasquinelli from Pine Richland School District join us today. He's going to be sharing a little bit later their experiences and their journey in using PVAAS projections for scheduling. So I don't know if you want to go ahead and say anything.
I'll just say welcome everybody, and I'll be coming on in a couple of minutes, so looking forward to talking to you.
All right, great to have you join us today. All right, so I do kind of want to see, we do have a small number of participants here, so rather than using the polling feature, if you wouldn't mind just giving us your specific role in the chat. Tell us who you are. You're a district level administrator, school level administrator, a teacher, counselor, maybe other position. Go ahead and drop that into the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any responses. Hopefully that chat, we've been able to, oh, great. There we go. We've got some people kind of responding. We've got instructional specialist, welcome. Other people who want to share your role. I think we can maybe speak from your experiences and your perspective in using the data. So here's the other thing that I would ask is, how often are you using your student learning data in student scheduling decisions? So again, since we have fewer people on, rather than doing the poll, why don't we just have you drop in the chat, how regularly are you actually incorporating some form of student learning data, whether that's state assessments, benchmark data, diagnostic, but how often are you using that in your student scheduling decisions? You can kind of tell us, we really aren't doing that at all right now. Are you doing that, occasionally, always? Great. I see some people meeting weekly about student data, so I'm assuming that's including some of those scheduling decisions. And I don't know if that's about all students, but go ahead. Anybody else who wants to share, how often are you actually using student data in scheduling decisions? Anybody else want to share how often you're doing that? And maybe that's why you're here today, so you can think about how often to use that. Okay. Well, we hope that as we go through here, I'm going to advance through this slide, that our goal here today is to really have you think about the data that you are using in these kinds of decisions. Wherever you are in using student learning data, we want to take you from where you are today and kind of ramp that up maybe one level. We want to help you think about how can the PVAAS projections be a good source of information to advise what students' needs are. We do know that research for a number of years now has shown that a key element to the PVAAS projections is the fact that they are more reliable and more accurate than using that last state assessment score alone. And the reason is because the PVAAS projections do use all of the historical projection data, or sorry about that, all of the historical state assessment data in the calculation of those projections. So in other words, if I'm looking at scheduling for a 7th grade student into their 8th grade year, I'm using not just their last PSSA score that I might have had from 6th grade, but I'm also using the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, all of that historical data in that projection for students. So we wouldn't say that it's the only source of data, but it's a good source of information to add to those kinds of decisions you're making about students' needs, and making sure that these scheduling decisions really are based about what the students' needs rather than what we need or we tend to do as adults. That's really, I think, the key thinking here. So that we know that as you're considering some of these placement decisions, how are we placing students into courses? Or if you're thinking about middle school or even in the elementary school and you're thinking about the placements into intervention supports or enrichments, what's that process that you have in place? Like, how are those decisions being made? We have just some examples here. We hear sometimes that students at high schools are actually self-selecting their courses. They're determining the courses that they're going into. How are the decisions being made for students to actually enroll in any kind of sort of enrichment or advanced kind of placement course, whether it's an AP course or an honors level course? What data, what information is used to help make those decisions for actual enrollment in those courses? When we talk about middle school math courses and even up into the secondary, what is the process or data that you have in place to think about that course sequence that those students are going through? I know that's something that Dr. Pasquinelli is going to be speaking to later, is Pine Richland's process through that and their journey in determining that. And then thinking about how are you placing elementary students into any kind of intervention or enrichment supports? Our key question is, what data is really being used to inform those decisions? Because we want objective student learning data to also be part of those decisions. So here's something that I'd like to go out and do, is I'd like you to link out to this Jamboard. The link is here on the screen, but I know it's kind of an ugly link there. So Laurie's putting the link to the Jamboard into the chat. What we'd like to do is hear a little bit more about your process. Indicate on the Post-it in the Jamboard if you're an elementary or middle or high school level. And then just in a few words, depending on if you are elementary, middle, or high school, respond to this kind of question. For elementary, if you're from that kind of focus, how are students being placed into those enrichment or intervention? If you're middle school, how are students being placed into math course pathways? And then at the high school, how are your students selecting their courses? Self-selecting, or are they having conversations with counselors? How does that process really work? So go ahead, I'm going to actually pause my screen and then go out to the Jamboard so we can kind of take a quick look at what current processes might be. And I would say if you're at an IU or you're a district person, you can pick one of those levels. If you're kind of one of those leaders, or even a teacher, leader, or counselor is covering multiple types of schools. So let me go ahead here. Pause my screen. I want to share the Jamboard. So if you're not familiar with the Jamboard, on the left-hand side, you see the tools. The fourth one down is the Post-it. There we go. There's Pine Richland. Thanks, Mike. You're posting out there, right? So if you can go ahead and create a Post-it like this, when I click on that, there's your sticky note. You can go ahead. All right, so pause here as people go ahead and insert their thoughts about their processes. So great. Yeah, whereas we see one person there coming in from an elementary perspective using school-wide and state assessment data. So it's great using the multiple sources of information to place students into those kinds of supports, whether that might be enrichment or intervention, and then additionally meeting every week about some of that data as well. Hey, anybody else want to share some of their current processes they might have in place? Let's have that little bit of wait time. Okay, well, we might have some people also sharing through the chat. But what I'll do is I'll just go back to the PowerPoint. It might be, why you're joining here today is to be thinking about some of that as well. And in fact, what does your process really look like? So I'll just go ahead and advance through some of those slides. Hopefully, as we go through here, these are some of the key questions that you can think about. Think about that process that you do have in place. And what is feeding into that process? Are you using data? Student learning data, maybe it's some a survey data that you have on students, maybe it's some behavioral data, attendance data, but what are those data and that are informing your student scheduling decisions? Are you including the PVAAS student projections as part of that? Also, are you including some of that data, the PVAAS projections, as you have those conversations with individual students or families in these scheduling decisions? I know some of you shared about how you're meeting weekly with Title I teachers, other teachers, as they're making maybe some of these recommendations for supports. Is this kind of data part of that discussion? So we do want to talk, obviously we're the PVAAS team, we do want to specifically talk about the PVAAS projections. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through 3 scenarios using a specific report called the PVAAS Child Success Summary as a data source in informing these kinds of decisions. And then we'll go into some resources and supports as we end the webinar here. So just if you're not as familiar with the PVAAS projections, we do have individual student projection data available in PVAAS. We have them available for all of our state assessments in the areas of math, ELA, and science, as well as those Keystone exams that students may be taking in the areas of literature, algebra, and biology. So we do have these projections available for example, the current year that we're in, the current school year, but we also get these projections out to future years. So as you're scheduling for students, we know you're not thinking about necessarily for those scheduling decisions, their likelihood of scoring at a proficient or advanced level this year, but you're really thinking out to next year as you're thinking about next year's supports or courses. And those projections are available out to next year and even out to a couple of years in the future as you're thinking about even course sequences. So as part of that, we also have projections out to 8 different AP exams. So these are the most commonly and widely given AP exams across our state right now. So these are the 8 areas in which we have projections available. Now we know that students in the middle school are not necessarily, they're not taking the AP courses and exams. Usually students aren't taking that until 11th or 12th grade, occasionally 10th, but usually 11th and 12th grade. But we can start getting these projections as early as 6th grade so that you can start thinking about what are the prerequisites, what are the pathways we want to make sure that students are on so that they are ready perhaps to take these AP courses and exams when they do get into their high school and 11th and 12th grade years. So it's about sort of that pre-planning to make sure they're on that pathway well in advance. So here's the first scenario we are sharing with you. Now, this is demo data. This is not an actual Pennsylvania student, but Please note, it's kind of modeled after actual students that we do see in Pennsylvania, and conversations we've had with other districts about how they're using and incorporating the PVAAS projections in this kind of scenario. So here we have Alex. Alex is a current 9th grade student in high school, meeting perhaps with a counselor, trying to decide what courses are going to be best for him in his 10th grade year, next year, in school year 23-24. Even thinking about beyond 10th grade, what are his interests? What is he thinking about in terms of 11th and 12th grade, so that we can ensure that any courses he's taking in 10th grade support where he wants to be and those individual student goals as an 11th or 12th grader throughout his entire high school career. So even think about this. Sometimes it's even about meeting with families as well with this kinds of information. We did a session recently with gifted teachers as they're thinking about meetings with in a GIEP meeting, or maybe even an IEP meeting. These kinds of conversations might be taking place. Now for Alex, Alex is a higher achieving student, and the considerations that he's thinking about are next year with biology and literature courses in 10th grade. Are honors courses at those levels in those subject areas appropriate for Alex? He also wants to think about any possible AP courses in his future. What might be good options for him? And what are prerequisites maybe for getting ready to take those in his later high school career? So here is what we call the Child Success Summary. This is a report where you can see at the very top, there are 4 sections to the report. There's the history, first of all, that we see for Alex. That's the first tab. So you can see that we get a nice visual and we get a table of information indicating where Alex has been in the past, clear back to 3rd grade, and even as clear up through his 8th grade year, taking that algebra exam actually in his 7th grade year. But we kind of see that history, taking a little dip there in math, it seems, but we can see that entire history. With the next tab on that Child Success Summary, we do see Alex's projections out to the Keystone exams. So we see that probability very high into the 90s, well up into the 90s of being proficient, at least proficient. That seems to not be a concern. But we see this probability as well for Alex. What's his probability of scoring an advanced level on that biology or literature exam that he's going to take in the future? And then thinking about those projections out to possible AP exams, we can see some very high probabilities, well up into the 70%, in a number of these areas, like biology or English language or psychology, where we see really high probabilities pretty much to a 3 or higher, and even some nice probabilities to even reaching that 4 or higher in some of these areas. So what we would like you to do is kind of think about that. I've kind of captured a little bit of a screenshot there as a reminder of the data that we were seeing as Alex's PVAAS projections. Share with us in the chat. What do you think? How might this data raise some discussion points or questions for you as if you were that counselor meeting, or maybe a teacher leader meeting with Alex? How might these projections kind of inform some of those discussions with Alex about honors courses or AP courses in the future? Go ahead and drop your thoughts there into the chat. I'll give a little bit of that wait time. Yeah, I would agree, Mike, and I know he's going to share that too. It's when some of these can be very difficult decisions, and this is a nice piece of what we would call more objective data about informing some of those decisions for students. For example, for Alex, we see for his honors biology or honors literature, would those be areas where we would want to encourage Alex to possibly enroll in those areas? We can see that pretty high probabilities of reaching advanced on the biology, not quite as high in literature, but maybe an honors course might really benefit him and increase that probability to reach an advanced level, especially when we see some really nice probabilities for Alex to reach a 3 or higher in some of these AP language. Maybe an honors literature course could be a nice prerequisite to get him ready for that. I would agree, right? Does Alex, like, what is his goal? Does he have, what is his career goal? Does that match what we're seeing, some of the strengths here and high probabilities in some of these subject areas that we might want to encourage him to take some of those honors courses? So these kinds of questions, and hopefully you can see how that would really be nice and a way to inform some of those decisions and discussions with Alex. So here's one piece. I know that Angela could not join us today, but Angela, Rohrbaugh is a high school guidance counselor in Gilton area high school up in sort of north central Pennsylvania. She was sharing with me recently how they've been really using student projections in PVAAS as a key data point with individual student data meetings. They are a smaller district, so they do have on a regular basis individual student data meetings with students. I know one of you mentioned that before, and it's something that you do as well. That along with, I think, Laurie, you mentioned, right, the consideration of what a student's career and interest are, they're having these decisions and using these projections as a discussion about course sequence pathways through the high school career. So we're meeting as early as 8th and 9th grade with students to plan some of the course pathways that might be possibilities for students. Not to say that students would then be set in these pathways, but it's starting that discussion about what pathways are available for them, so that we're also making sure that opportunities are available for all students and not just specific students. The example that Angela shared with me recently was a 9th grade student kind of was looking, she had one student looking at a medical career, another one who had an interest sort of maybe in possibly engineering. That's what they wanted to explore. So for those students, she was really thinking about what are those probabilities for these students to perhaps reach a 3 or higher in AP Bio or AP Calc. Thinking about those might be possible courses that would really help benefit them if they do want that kind of career path. That is an interest that they stay in. That what can she do as a counselor to make sure that they're taking courses that would prepare them for perhaps taking the AP Bio or Calc in the future? So that projection probability to Keystones to AP became a really important data point to discuss with that student and with their families. So I do want to, I see we have a question back here. I am going to go back here one slide where we see, yes, a blank here on a child success summary in those 4 or higher. For any places where we see a blank, that would mean that students' probability is less than 20%. Doesn't mean they don't have a probability here. It's just a lower percent. It's below 20%. So in any cases like that, it's simply not displayed on the child success summary. Okay, so that's an important thing. You could always go to another report called the student projection report to actually view what the projection is, even if it's below 20%. So great question. Thanks for sharing that and bringing that up. So any questions that we have so far from the group? Laurie, anything that's been inserted into the Q&A or the chat we haven't been able to address yet?
At this point, you have addressed all of the questions, but I'll keep my eye on it.
Okay, great. Yes, as we go through, hopefully this is helping you to think about your current process, how you're using the data in those course selection decisions, whether it's with, meeting with individual students, their families, and no matter what level, elementary, middle, or high school. So yeah, think about that. Drop any questions that you have. We'll continue on here with some other examples. So this is a middle school example. This would be Mia, who is currently in 7th grade, and we're trying to think about what's going to be the best math course that's appropriate for Mia as she enters into her 8th grade year. Now, this is just a pretty simple example we've put in place here, saying that there could be 3 options for her in this kind of demo or sample district. She might have a choice of grade 8 math, pre-algebra, or algebra 1 in 8th grade. How do we make those decisions for Mia? What's in her best interest? Again, we use that child success summary that we can obtain Mia's history on those state assessments. We can see from 3rd to 5th to 6th grade. This happened to be a student who didn't test in 4th due to the pandemic, but we can see currently in 7th grade. So we don't have that 7th grade PSSA yet because we're in March here of Mia's 7th grade year. We're trying to schedule for her 8th grade year already. We can see that history in math. Where has she been? We can also then see out those projections. And you'll see that I kind of have these color coded, not to mean they're a high or low projection. I don't mean like the green and the red that way. Just trying to distinguish between the 2 different types of projections that you have for Mia. In green, you see the PSSA projections. You see the projections out to Mia's current 7th grade year. She's going to take the test, the state assessment in 7th grade here very shortly. Currently looking like about a very high probability to reaching proficiency, but about a 43% probability to reach advanced. When we also are thinking about out to that 8th grade year, and we're thinking, do we have her in algebra, pre-algebra, and 8th grade math class? We want to think about both things. Her 8th grade math projection, what's her probability to reach proficient or advanced in that 8th grade math, but also that algebra exam. We've got both projections. So thinking about the fact that Mia needs to demonstrate, and their goal is for her to demonstrate mastery, proficiency on both 8th grade math and algebra next year, how does that projection inform those discussions? What might be some of the points and things that you might want to consider? And how do these PVAAS projections help you inform those discussion points with Mia about her placement? So again, I'm going to pause here. See any thoughts that anybody else might have about that. What are some of your thoughts? No right or wrong answer in terms of the course, because we know there's other data that would actually you'd want to use with these projections to inform the actual placement. But if you see these projections, are there questions that might raise for you? Yeah, and we are talking actually, right? Thanks for joining. Glad you could join now, whether it's at the start or now at this point in the session. But yes, we are talking about algebra readiness. We might want to think about, or do we have another kind of algebra readiness assessment that we're giving, whether that's a formal one. I know there's been some New Orleans Hannah ones out there. Maybe that's something you've done internally that you can use as part of this. What's that also indicating, as well as these projections? We can see those ELA projections that could feed into some of that reading comprehension that goes into the success of math as well. We can see Mia has some strong probabilities to even reaching advanced in ELA. So that could be an important point to discuss as well in terms of her placement. So go ahead and continue to put those thoughts into the chat. One thing that I do want to point out is that part of these kind of criteria that you're selecting for math course pathways in the secondary, we do have a resource called the Success in Secondary Math that helps you think about as a system, what are your course pathways for students? But specifically on pages 23 through 31, we do speak to the actual criteria that you could use at an individual student level about the decision protocol that you might have in place for math course placement in the secondary level, starting with 6th grade. So you may want to check that out. We have shared a link right in the chat to this document, but if you have, and maybe Laurie can drop the PowerPoint link in as well, because that is part of the PowerPoint as well. Now, what I want to do now is I actually do want to turn it over to Dr. Pasquinelli to talk about how they're using some of this for these exact kind of decisions in Pine Richland. So Take it away, Mike.
Okay, good morning, everybody. You good with hearing me okay? Good, okay.
Yes, we are. Good.
All right, so I thought one thing I'll just give a little bit of a shout out, and I mentioned this earlier, and by no means am I here because I'm promoting the PVAAS team, but it has been a huge benefit for us to take advantage of some of those one-on-one sessions. We have really learned a lot and been able to use what we've learned from those sessions to integrate in what we're doing around data and PVAAS in particular with the team. So we do appreciate that. But a little bit of the background history for us. So we started really thinking about our math pathways first. That was an area that we were really struggling with. And I'm going to share can I share my screen, Jen?
Yes, absolutely. I can stop share so you can share yours.
Okay, great. Just so you can see what our pathway looked like in the past. So what you're seeing on the screen, this was probably 8 years ago. And where we were really struggling was I'd say K to 6. And what we were seeing is, you again think about all students, and let's use grade 2 for example, are in a second grade math class, and you have a wide range of readiness of learners in that class. That's a struggle for the teacher, and it's a struggle for the students as well. Some students are ready for a faster pace and more detailed and complex instruction, and some are not. And having students with that great of a range next to each other was a challenge. The other thing that we were seeing, we have 3 different elementary schools, K to 3, and how they were enriching their students for our math program was different. And then that would impact when all the kids came together. For us, all kids come together in grade 4. So there were some discrepancies there that added to the challenges. So we first started with, like, what can we do with our math pathways to a little bit narrow the range of learners. And in that slide that we had up in a second ago was really what we were looking for. We were looking what we call just out of reach learning. It's not too difficult that you get frustrated. It's not so easy that you're bored. It's that stretch and grow course that we were trying to figure out. So from where we were, we went to, I have to move this just for a second. How's that? Can you see that okay?
If you could just there we go. That's a good size. There we go.
So this is what our current math pathways looks like. And you can see it's different. So now starting in grade 3, we have what we call compacted, extended, and current. Now the current pathway is the traditional 3rd grade math, which was an academic course, and students taking that course have a pathway to calculus. You can see that over to the far right. And then we have a kind of a step up to compacted, extended, and then we have more of an accelerated pathway. And then we have a pathway for students that need additional support. Now, what we say to our parents is, you're not stuck in a pathway. In 3rd grade, the right path for you may be current, but as you grow and mature and you learn different concepts, you may move to a different pathway, up or down, depending on the unique needs of the child. So that's where the data came in. Like, how do we make really well-informed decisions regarding which path is the right path for each child? So we started building out what we called math matrices, and we were looking at different data points. So we didn't want to put all the pressure on a teacher to say to the 2nd grade teacher, make the recommendation for the right pathway for all of your students, because that's a lot for one person. Although they know their children very well, we thought, looking at other data points could help drive our final recommendations. And that was the evolution of the data that Jen mentioned a minute ago. Okay, so I can stop presenting, and then if you go back to the slide, I can kind of pick up from there. All right, so in the orange box, we're talking about just out of reach. So we had the old pathway where we had a wide range of learners, and we were struggling to meet the needs of all of the kids in the classroom. So we narrowed the pathway, and now we're looking for, what are the data points that can help drive and make good recommendations for us. So go ahead to the next slide, Jen. So this is example of what data we get at this point. So we landed on PVAAS projections. You'll see those in the far right column. We use teacher attributes. So we do value teacher input in making the recommendations. That's in the column next to the PVAAS. We use Star 360 for both reading and math. So we're using Star 360 data. And then we use quarter 1 through 3, including we do midterms in our middle school. This is an example of students going from 6th to 7th grade. So we have those multiple data points. So all the weight's not on the shoulders of a teacher, but we put the greatest weight on our PVAAS projections. And we do that because we know that the data set is so strong because it's using all of those other assessment experience of students to make those projections, that we have a high level of confidence in our PVAAS projections. So we put 40% of the weight on those PVAAS projection scores. We've worked with our student information system. This is, we use Sapphire here at Pine Ridgeland. So they have developed a report for us. So they take all of these different data points that we feed into the system. And again, PVAAS is easy. You just download it out of PVAAS, you upload it into your student management system, and you've got it there. Same thing with STAR. The only data that has to be hand entered are the teacher attributes. Everything else is just calculated through the student information system or through those individual platforms. And then what the report does is it generates a rank. So if you can hover over that left column there, and you'll see that's a placement rank. So basically, I use the number like 100. If you take a 100 students and rank them 1 to 100 based upon all of those data points, you're going to start seeing things. You're going to see most likely again at the top the students that are most ready for those accelerated or higher pathway math courses. And then as you move down through the rank, we color code as well, so you can start seeing changes. So if you see a lot of blues and greens and yellows, those are higher level scores. When you start seeing more of the reds and the yellows, then you start seeing kids that have been struggling a bit more. So what the administrators do is they look at the rank report and they look for like a natural break point that would be an appropriate place to consider where the math pathways would go from accelerated to compacted, extended to current to our lowest pathway. And then they start making their recommendations, not just on one data point, but on multiple data points that are help guide those decisions. So then once those recommendations are made, then we send out to every family, here's your recommendation for math pathways for the next year. Most families, because they know that there are multiple data points driving this, are supportive and accept that, hey, that makes perfect sense. And again, we stress the just out of reach, right? We want their kids to grow and to learn, but we don't want them to be frustrated. We don't want them to be bored. And what we found over the last 5-6 years is we don't have a lot of movement between pathways. So that tells us that the kids that are being recommended in a path, they're in that place. They're in that just out of reach learning, and we don't have a lot of requests for change. Now, we do sometimes get a request for, hey, my child was recommended for the current pathway. I'd like to see them in the compacted extended. There are opportunities to have those conversations with parents, but that's where we go back into the PVAAS projections and we say, look at the projections for the future. That's helping guide us in making these recommendations. In some cases, the parents will be like, oh, that makes sense, and they're going to stick with our recommendation. In some cases, they say, I'd still like to challenge my child more, and that's fine. I mean, we allow families to make the final decision, but we really want it to be data-based and help them to make well-informed decisions with all the resources that we have available. So PVAAS is definitely a major part of it. Those other pieces of information are there to help guide us as well. So,
Hey, Michael?
Yeah, go ahead.
We do have a question in the chat regarding some of those other decision pieces. The question specifically is what percent weighting do the common assessments and STAR get? And then maybe my extension to that question is, how did you come upon deciding those percentages as well?
Okay, so I'll give you for 6th going to 7th grade, the percentages work out like this. We have 40% of the weight is from PVAAS projections, 20% comes from our STAR scores, 30% comes from our Q1, 2, and midterm average, and then 10% comes from teacher attribute. That was a little bit of a trial and error. You know, we have changed some data points over time. We have put more weight on some areas than others, but we have heavy emphasis on STAR. We obviously have heavy emphasis on PSSA and Keystone, so we feel like they should have a heavy weight. Our quarter 1, 2, and midterm averages, that's what the kids are doing in the current class. So there's weight there. And then we landed on 10% of the teacher attribute as the right level of, hey, this is what I'm seeing from my professionally certified experience. So we've played around with those percentages over time, but we feel like where we are now has really been helpful for us. And then we've expanded this beyond math. So now for students that are moving from grade 7 to 8, we're also using matrices to make recommendations because we have compacted extended for 8th grade ELA, for 8th grade science, and for 8th grade social studies. Now, we're still using PVAAS projections, but for example, for social studies, let's say we use PVAAS projections to ELA because, again, if students are projected to do well on ELA, most likely they're going to have that success in social studies because the amount of reading and writing that happens in a social study. So we're considering PVAAS projections to ELA for social studies. We do the Q1, Q2 midterm average for social studies. We do something called a document-based question. That's an assessment that the teachers administer. We use that as part of the matrix data. And then we have the teacher attribute that we use for social studies as well. And then the same thing happens. That data is put into our system. We get the rank report, and then our administrators and teachers make final recommendations for the pathways for ELA, for science, and social studies as well. And then when we get to the high school is very heavy weighted with teacher recs. So we have the prereqs that are in our program of studies. Our teachers work with their students. It's about this time of year that they're making recommendations. But again, in those cases where we're not 100% sure, maybe a student's on the bubble or the parents want to talk about a student taking a course that's at a higher pathway, then we'll go back to PVAAS projections and we'll use the exact things that we just saw a couple slides earlier and talk through that with the families and students to try to help them make good decisions. So it's been an evolution. It's been a work in progress with our student information system. It's been collaboration with the PVAAS statewide team to help us understand how to really take advantage of the data. But we feel like we've landed at a place now where we're making good, solid recommendations because, again, we don't see a lot of change once students get settled into their pathway.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Obviously, this wasn't something that happened overnight for you either, right? It was a trial and error. It was a process to build along the way. But I think some of the benefits, as you've shared, and the fact that teachers are feeling less pressure, recommendations are considered, but it's a heavier weight on some of that student learning data, more of the objective data. Also, that feeds into making sure that all students, have access depending on what their own data says, and that you've got flexibility. I think that's another big piece that you mentioned about flexibility in the pathway, so that once students are set in one, they're not set in that for their entire, middle high school career, that they can move those pathways as they need. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I think we might have some more questions. We'll go through a couple more things and then we'll make sure that we stay on for questions. But anything, Laurie, do you think needs to be addressed now?
There is one question regarding, since moving to this more data-driven process, have you had any opportunity to examine the distribution of students by demographics as part of this? So I'm not sure if now's a good time to answer that, or if you want to think on it, we can talk about that later.
I can real quick. Yeah, that is definitely something that we consider. So I don't recall if we showed that in the one slide, but when we pull the data, we're pulling all of the information about students. So we're pulling gender, we're pulling ethnicity, we're pulling race, we're pulling if they're in a special education, gifted education. Yeah, you can see that on the left-hand side. So yeah, we're considering that as well, and to see if we have some trends in where students end up, whether it's in the lower pathway or the accelerated pathway. And then what do we do about that as a result of any trends that we're seeing? You know, ultimately, we want kids in class where they can stretch and grow. I mean, that's it. We don't want to put a student in a class that accelerated for any other reason than they're ready for that experience. If not, then they're just going to be frustrated and it's not going to be helpful. We value students with mixed backgrounds to be able to gather and collaborate and learn from each other. There's real positive things in that. And we still have a range of learners in the class. We just went from a range that's like this wide to this wide. And it's beneficial for everybody in that class when you're a little bit closer in proximity to readiness. And there's no number. So that next question that came up, it is really, we're looking for the trends in the data and where does it look like for a natural cut point. You know, we're looking at what courses were they in the previous year, what success are they having in those courses, and then we start seeing those trends where the scores are a bit lower. Then that's kind of where we determine. So that cut line may change year after year depending on the group of students that we're assessing.
Yeah, which is another great point, letting the data speak, the student learning data speak to what the needs are, rather than us setting that in advance as saying, hey, this is what's convenient or what works for us as adults, but because the student needs could change over time as well. So letting that data drive that, I think is a really important point. All right, so let's just go. I'm just going to walk quickly just so you can see here and then end with some resources, some information about the PVAAS projections that you might have. Here's just a last example about elementary, but I think you probably get the idea, especially from hearing Mike talk about the experience there and journey of Pine Richland. But this is an example of Ben, current fourth grader. How can we use those projections to think about supports enrichment for Ben next year as a fifth grader? So you can see Ben's history, whereas Ben is a third grader, but most importantly, you see the projections out to a current fourth grade year. Is going to go ahead and already take these assessments in fourth grade, ELA and math, where we can see high probabilities to be proficient, but advanced looks a little bit different. But here's where it really becomes important to think about what are those projections out to the fifth grade year, especially when you see something like this for Ben, where we still see, oh, ELA still looks to be pretty strong in terms of that probability of proficiency. To get to advanced might drop though. So would Ben benefit maybe for some continued enrichment or rigor? And certainly when we look out to Ben's fifth grade math year, thinking, well, it's got a high probability this year being proficient, but what about next year? Do we think about keeping Ben on the radar as a possible, thinking about some potential intervention for Ben as he enters into the fifth grade year, and we see that lower probability to proficiency. So rather than just using that last PSSA score or last benchmark assessment score, really using all of that data along with these PVAAS projections to say, what is the path and the risk level for students so we can best support their needs. Okay, so just a couple ending points here for you to consider as you're thinking about access then to this data, the PVAAS projections. You do have to have a PVAAS account that has access to student level data, and that is a local district LEA decision. That is not something that PDE or SAS EVAS or we on the PVAAS team determine. That can be decided locally. School admin account holders make that determination in terms of the access for their teachers or school level users. District admin account holders can adjust that access for district level users. We do see that some districts are sharing these projections with students and families. It's not something that students and families have access to. This isn't a restricted PVAAS account, so you do need a PVAAS account, a login, credentials to access it, but it does not prevent you as a district from sharing this data with students and families as you're meeting with them. So if you do choose, you can supplement that when you're meeting with families and students with the Child Success Summary Companion Guide. So we have given a link here in this PowerPoint, dropped it in the chat, so you can see how this is a companion guide that can support most sort of the commonly asked questions that might come up about PVAAS projections and this specific report. So this is just one of the slides that you may want to just kind of flag for yourself. This is sort of a cheat sheet and thinking about if you have students that you're planning for now. You have, for example, a current, a 6th grader. What am I going to access in PVAAS? You're going to access the current 6th grade cohort, but you're going to access and run the projections and look at the projections out to 7th grade in order to plan for next year's 7th grade year. And when we get up into the high schools, then these are some suggestions at the projections that you would want to look for as you're planning for course selections next year and throughout the high school careers. So if you happen to be, at a middle school where you've got 6th graders or maybe 5th graders, 7th graders coming into your building and you don't have those students because they're coming into you from a feeder building, there are options. Perhaps, if you don't have access to the data, you can work with district level administrators to give you access to that data from your feeder schools. That's one option we hear districts approach that with. The other is that those feeder schools could actually kind of print out that data, they could save the data and share it with you in that way. So a couple different options in order to have that. So I'm just going to I'm going to hold the questions here just to share a couple remaining resources, and then we'll make sure that we stay on for any remaining questions. Some questions we do get about the accuracy of the PVAAS projections, what data is used in the projections. There is a resource, 2 to 3 page resource that addresses all of that for you. So we've provided a link in the PowerPoint. We can drop that link into the chat so that you have a link to that resource that answers all of those questions for you. If you additionally want to learn more about the PVAAS projections, if you click on the e-learning link on the PVAAS login page, you will see that there's lots of e-learning available, and there is one to learn more about that child success summary. And then if you're in the system, happen to click on the help for the online help content, you can see that there is one directly for a lot of help for the child success summary. So thank you for staying with us. I know there were a lot of great questions for Mike, and there might still be some questions, so feel free to stay on. We'll make sure we answer those questions. You've got great points of contact at every intermediate unit region. Use that contact us button to find your IU PVAAS point of contact or contact SAS EVAS, the vendor, directly. You can always reach us on the statewide team at pdepvas@iu13.org. If you have a link to that PowerPoint, I know Mike's contact information is on those slides as well. So any remaining questions for any of us and as we kind of close today?
Jen, the chat is clear, the question and answer is clear. So I think that all of today's questions have been addressed.
Okay, well, we will stay on here for a few more minutes, but thank you for joining us today. And we hope to see you in some future webinars or one-to-one sessions.